Hello, Hospitality 3004. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about strategic leadership. For the last several weeks throughout the semester, we've been talking about the strategic planning and strategic management process. But the thing is that ultimately we cannot deal with the strategic management process without having strategic leadership first. So this is really what we're going to be talking about today. So the idea is that we're going to be talking about CEOs, as you will have seen from the rest of the material for this week. Ultimately, we're concerned with the fact that our strategic leaders, their job is to guide the firm in ways that result in formulating a vision and mission and then achieving that. So they're constantly looking at how can they create goals, how can they challenge people within the organization to improve performance. So very often what happens is when a new CEO comes into a company, the company's vision and mission is already set. However, he or she will determine their own vision, their own mission for what it is that they are attempting to achieve. And ultimately, these various different paths that we're looking at here, we have this effective leadership leading to strategic intent and mission, which of course goes down to these various different actions in the form of strategies. Ultimately, what do we want to do? We want to achieve this competitiveness. We want this above average return. So we want to obviously be making lots and lots of money. So that's really what we are looking at. Now, in terms of actually getting those things done, there are a few things that we really need to be thinking about. So we hire a CEO and we expect them, we expect them to have outcomes and to be successful and to accomplish above average returns. In order to do that, there needs to be a certain amount of freedom that they have. So we call this discretion, and so that's why I have factors affecting managerial discretion up there at the top of the screen. So we have managerial discretion. This discretion really varies significantly depending on particular industries. So for instance, you have some industries that are very highly regulated, like engineering or mining. Obviously, those are very important. You don't want to, people to be doing whatever it is that they want, to be getting themselves into trouble, getting hurt, that sort of thing. So some industries have less discretion for their top CEOs. Some countries give or prohibit discretion just naturally by the culture. But anyway, the idea is that obviously our CEO is expected to be able to make some of their own decisions in what it is that they're trying to accomplish. So as you can see here, essentially what is impacting and feeding into this managerial discretion. So you've got your external environment. I've already mentioned some of those, such as your industry structure. You have the characteristics of the organization. So for instance, we were talking previously about shareholders and who the owners are. If most of the shares are controlled by a select group of people, or if it's actually like a family business that has somebody else as the CEO, somebody might have less discretion because ultimately the family does have the capacity to pull rank if they want to. And then of course you do have the characteristics of the manager himself or herself. And some of that has to do with sort of their past experience, their own skills, their level of confidence, their knowledge of this particular field. Sometimes we do put CEOs in place that do not know that industry particularly well. Sometimes that works out great, other times not so much. But all of these things are going to be affecting the CEO, but then you also have what's called your top management team. And your top management team, those are your other major executives. Now again, when it comes to how much discretion they have and what it is that they're going to be doing, these people are often making a lot of the big decisions. They are informing the CEO. Certain executives are going to know things and be very well, very knowledgeable about particular areas, more so than the CEO will. So they will really be giving that information as needed to the CEO to help that person make decisions. When it comes to succession, so you've got a CEO, the CEO is fired or chooses to leave or retires or in some cases dies. there's a lot of talk around succession. So the idea is who is going to be succeeding or who is going to be taking over as CEO or within that top management team, and how is that going to impact strategies. So there's a few different things going on there. So if you have a CEO that has a very long tenure, sorry about that, very long pause, there was a plane flying above. So if you have a CEO that has a very long tenure within the organization, then very often what ends up happening is there can be a bit of a difficulty with regard to the transition. Obviously, you do have some companies who will keep the same person in that particular position for a very extended period of time, and then they just sort of assume that they're going to stay forever. And sometimes it can actually be rather difficult to get that person out. But this is where we start looking at, should a CEO, the new CEO, be from internal, so from within the company, or external, from outside of the company? A lot of companies, it used to be very common that CEOs were always promoted from within because there was consistency, people knew them, they understood the company culture, they understood what the company stood for, all of that. So it was considered to be typical. However, there's been more and more emphasis put on external CEOs because that means that they are coming in and they don't necessarily know or are involved in the politics. They have new, fresh ideas. They're more interested in innovating, so forth and so on. So it is very, very common nowadays to have CEOs that come from outside of the company. But then again, it's still kind of a mixed bag situation. So when we're talking about CEOs, we're talking about, should the person come from internal or external? And then how is that person going to work with the people currently in the top management team? If the top management team is very homogeneous, and this could be anything, as in everybody in the top management team are all men, or everybody in the top management team are all from UQ. Again, good, bad, or ugly, these things happen. And this can, with an internal CEO, it means that very often the strategy stays quite stable. If you have a very homogeneous top management team and then you have an external CEO coming in, that could mean that those people start really panicking and thinking, oh, I'm going to lose my job. If you have a top management team that's very heterogeneous, chances are good with an internal CEO that the strategy will remain stable, but the CEO hopefully will continue to innovate. Again, if the top management team is heterogeneous and you've got an external CEO coming in, you're probably looking at quite a bit of strategic change because there will be less pushback. Now, one more thing that I wanted to mention with regard to strategic leadership. As we've been talking about, we have this concern about the direction itself. We've been talking about that quite a bit, but what we haven't really talked a whole lot about has been the balanced organizational controls. There are really a few things that we're looking at when we're talking about these balanced organizational controls. So we're talking about things like finances, obviously. So what kind of cash flow do we have? What kind of balance sheets do we have? What sorts of assets do we have available to us? There would be other aspects such as internal business processes. So this might be, utilizing the assets that we have and how are we going to improve them? Or what are we doing in order to change turnover rates? Or what are we doing to improve employee morale? All of those sorts of things could fall into that. Customers, of course, also do fall into that organizational control and how we make those decisions, because we have repeat customers, quality of communications with customers, effective customer service practices, etc. And then I would say that one other one is sort of the learning, the growth, the technology, the innovation, introducing new products, introducing and increasing employee skills. All of those are part of this. And so these all play into the portfolio and how we're trying to manage that portfolio. These play into things like the organizational culture. So we should all be familiar with organizational culture from classes that we've taken over the last several semesters. And then ethical practices, which again, you guys should be relatively familiar with CSR, but we'll be talking about that a little bit later. So So this is really some of the basics with regard to strategic leadership that you need to be familiar with. The other readings and video and what we're going to be talking about in the tutorial will certainly help to bring this all together. But if you are familiar with these terms, you should be in pretty good shape. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.